My father laughed at me across a dinner table on the night I was most proud of myself. Not a polite laugh. Not the confused laugh of a man who didn't understand what he was hearing. The specific laugh of a man who understood perfectly and found it underwhelming. I had driven 40 minutes to my parents' house that Friday evening with the letter on the passenger seat beside me. A formal envelope, company letterhead, my name printed at the top in clean black type. Senior Compliance Analyst. Effective the 1st of the following month. I had read it 4 times in the parking garage before I drove home, not because I didn't believe it, but because I wanted to hold what it meant for a moment before I handed it to anyone else. I had worked 11 years for that letter. 11 years of 7 a.m. starts. 11 years of reading regulatory frameworks that most people would not read voluntarily under any circumstances. 11 years of being the person in the room who caught the small thing that became the large problem, the detail that looked like nothing until it became everything. 11 years of being right in ways nobody applauds because the nature of compliance work is that when it goes correctly, nothing happens. There is no visible outcome. The disaster does not occur. The company does not receive the fine. The investigation does not open. Everything simply continues as normal, which is exactly what it is supposed to do, and nobody thanks you for the normal. I drove to my parents' house with that letter on the passenger seat, and I believed, somewhere in the careful, well-organized space of my own heart, that this would be the thing that finally landed. My mother had made roast chicken. My father was at the head of the table where he always sat, in the chair with the slightly higher back that nobody else used. My brother Ethan was there with his wife, Lauren, who had the particular brightness of someone who has learned to perform enthusiasm at family dinners. Ethan was wearing a watch I did not recognize, which meant it was new, which meant it was expensive, which meant my father would find a way to mention it before the meal was over. I waited until the first course was cleared. Then I took the envelope from my bag and set it on the table beside my plate. "I got promoted," I said. My father looked at the envelope, then at me. "To what?" he said. "Senior Compliance Analyst." There was a pause of approximately 2 seconds, and in those 2 seconds my father's expression did the specific thing it does when he has already formed his verdict and is deciding how gently to deliver it. He did not deliver it gently. He laughed. "A compliance promotion?" He said the word compliance the way you say a word that doesn't quite translate, with a slight pause before it, as though he needed to locate it. "That's pathetic." He turned to look at Ethan, who was already smiling in the way he smiles when he is the beneficiary of a comparison. "Now your brother," my father said, picking up his fork. "That's what real success looks like." A few people at the table laughed softly, not cruelly, or rather, not intentionally. The way a table laughs when the person with the most authority in the room has made a judgment, and laughter is the easiest response. My mother reached for her wine glass. Lauren looked at her plate. Ethan looked at me with an expression that was almost apologetic, almost, in the way a person looks apologetic when they are not entirely sorry. I smiled. I folded the envelope and put it back in my bag. I ate my roast chicken, and I said the appropriate things when spoken to, and I drove home 40 minutes later in a car that felt larger than it should have for one person. What I did not know that night, what none of us knew, was that the thing my father called pathetic was about to become the most important professional credential in any room connected to our family, and that my brother's real success was, at that exact moment, signing the documents that would eventually bring federal investigators to his front door. My father's name is Richard Bennett. He is 63 years old, and he built a small manufacturing business in the 1990s that did reasonably well for about 15 years before the market shifted and the business contracted into something that sustained itself without flourishing. He sold it when I was in my mid-20s and has lived comfortably since on the proceeds, which is more than most people manage, and which he treats as evidence of an exceptional mind rather than reasonable timing in a particular market. I do not say that with cruelty. I say it because it matters for understanding how he thinks about success. To my father, success is visible. It has a physical address. It drives a specific kind of car. It wears a watch that people recognize without being told what it costs. It carries the particular energy of a man who has recently closed a deal, the looseness in the shoulders, the ease of a person who has just confirmed what he already believed about himself. By that measure, my brother Ethan is the most successful person my father has ever known personally. Ethan is 32 years old. He is 3 years younger than me, and he has always moved through the world with the forward tilt of someone who believes the room is already arranged in his favor. Not arrogantly, exactly. More like a person who has simply never been given sufficient reason to doubt it. He is charming in the way that comes easily to people who have been told they are charming since childhood, which means the charm is genuine, but the foundation beneath it is shallower than it appears. He took a position at a mid-sized financial services firm 8 years ago. Within 2 years, he had moved into deal structuring. Within 4, he was a senior director. Within 6, he was running a division with 40 people under him and a compensation package that my father mentioned at every family gathering with the particular satisfaction of a man reading aloud from a document that validates everything he has ever believed. The car. The vacations. The watch I didn't recognize at dinner. The restaurant he recommended to my father last spring that required a reservation made 6 weeks in advance. Every one of these things was, in my father's accounting, proof. And every one of my things was, by comparison, not proof. I want to be precise about the pattern because it is easy to summarize these things as ordinary sibling favoritism and miss the specific texture of it. I graduated with honors. My father's response was that honors from a state school didn't carry the weight of a degree from somewhere people recognized. I received a full academic scholarship. My father said it was good that I didn't need financial help since he had other things to manage. I took my first compliance position at 24 entry level because that is where compliance careers begin, and there is no shortcut through the foundational years. My father asked once, at a Sunday dinner, whether I had considered something more forward-facing, something with a clearer ceiling. I said compliance was forward-facing. He said he supposed it was if you liked paperwork. Ethan bought his first luxury car at 26, and my father called me to tell me about it. He did not ask how my week had been. He called specifically to describe the car. The color, the interior, the feature that allowed the seats to adjust automatically to a stored setting for each driver. He described this feature with the focused appreciation of a man encountering genuine innovation. I sat on the other end of that phone call and thought about the quarterly compliance audit I had just completed, which had identified a procedural gap in our vendor approval process that had been running unchecked for 3 years. I had documented it, escalated it, watched it get corrected. Nothing dramatic had happened as a result. The gap closed. The process continued correctly. A future problem did not materialize. Nobody called me to describe it with appreciation. I said, "That sounds like a great car, Dad," and he said, "Your brother always had taste," and the call ended. My mother's name is Carol. She is a gentle woman who has spent 40 years negotiating the distance between what she observes and what she is willing to address, and the distance has grown so habitual she no longer notices it as a distance. She loves me. I believe this without qualification. She also loves the equilibrium of her household more than she loves the discomfort of defending things, and so she has loved me quietly, in the careful, sideways way of a woman who has learned to love without disrupting. She once, after a particularly difficult dinner, put her hand on my arm in the kitchen and said, "Your father is proud of you. He just doesn't know how to say it for things he doesn't understand." I asked her what she meant by understand. She said, "He understands what Ethan does because it looks like what he did. Yours is different." I asked if she understood what I did. She paused for a moment. "You keep things from going wrong," she said. "Don't you?" "Yes," I said. She nodded slowly. "He'll understand it eventually." I kept the promotion letter in my bag for the drive home from my parents' house that Friday night. When I got to my apartment, I took it out and looked at it for a moment under the kitchen light, then put it in the second drawer of my desk where I kept documents I considered important. The drawer that held my lease, my insurance card, my original degree certificate, I closed the drawer. I made tea and went to bed and did not call anyone because there was no version of a phone call that night that would have left me feeling better than the silence did. Paperwork always gets the last word. My supervisor had told me the week before when she called me into her office to deliver the promotion formally before the letter arrived. She said it with the tone of someone who has worked long enough in a regulated industry to have seen that sentence prove itself repeatedly. I had written it down when I got back to my desk. I did not know yet how precisely it applied to my own family. I want to tell you what that promotion actually was because my father's dismissal of it rested on a fundamental misunderstanding of the industry he was dismissing, and I think the misunderstanding matters. Senior Compliance Analyst is not a clerical title. It is not the professional equivalent of a filing position or a form processing role, which is, I think, what my father imagined when he heard the word compliance. It is the title given to the person in an organization who is responsible for understanding the regulatory environment in which the company operates, not just the current rules, but the direction they are moving, the areas where the rules are ambiguous, the places where a company's current practices are technically compliant, but moving toward an edge that reasonable people would recognize as risky. It is the job of identifying what has not yet become a problem, but will. The reason this is difficult is that the people who create the risks rarely believe they are creating risks. They believe they are being efficient. They believe they are simplifying a process that was unnecessarily complicated. They believe they are making a judgment call in a gray area that will never be examined because the odds of examination are low and the benefit of the shortcut is immediate. They sign the document without reading the third page. They approve the invoice without confirming the underlying work was completed. They authorize the transfer because someone they trust said it was fine, and they have 12 other things to do before lunch. And then the odds catch up. Because odds always do, eventually, if the underlying practice continues long enough. My promotion meant I was now responsible for the oversight function across 3 divisions of the company. It meant I had a team under me, a direct line to the audit committee, and the authority to escalate to the board if I determined that a compliance issue had not been addressed adequately by the normal reporting chain. It meant I was, in the professional architecture of my company, the person whose signature on a document meant the company had done what it was supposed to do. The title meant something. I sat with that in the drawer of my desk, between my lease and my degree certificate, while my father's dinner party conversation moved on to Ethan's upcoming trip to a resort in Portugal that he had booked through some connection that gave him access to rooms most guests couldn't request. I left the dinner early. I said I had an early morning, which was true, and also not the real reason. The real reason was that I had eaten approximately half my meal and smiled at approximately 14 things I did not find amusing, and I had reached the end of what I could absorb that evening without it leaving a mark I would feel the next morning. I hugged my mother at the door. She held on for a second longer than usual, which was her way of saying something she was not going to say out loud. I drove home, and the letter was in my bag, and my father's voice was in the car with me, and somewhere between the highway and my apartment, I made a decision that I have since understood was less a decision and more an alignment, the kind that happens when you finally stop waiting for an external verdict and make your own. I was good at my job. I had been good at it for 11 years, and whether or not my father understood what the job was real, and the promotion was real, and the letter in my bag was evidence of a truth that did not require his recognition to be true. I put the letter in the drawer. I made tea. I went to bed. 6 weeks after the dinner, I was at my desk at 7:15 in the morning, working through the previous day's flagged items, when I saw the article. It was a small piece in a financial industry newsletter I had subscribed to years ago, the kind of publication that tracks regulatory developments with the humorless precision of people who find regulatory developments genuinely interesting, which I do, and which I have accepted says something particular about my personality. The article was 3 paragraphs. The headline used the phrase preliminary inquiry, which in the language of financial regulation means something specific. It means a regulator has seen something that made them look a second time. Not an investigation. Not yet. A closer look. The company named was Ethan's firm. I read the article twice. Then I set my coffee down and read it a third time. A preliminary inquiry is not a disaster. Companies receive preliminary inquiries with some regularity, particularly in the kind of deal-heavy financial services environment my brother worked in. Most of them amount to a round of document requests, a few written responses, and a quiet conclusion that the matter was less significant than the initial indicators suggested. The company produces the records. The records show nothing irregular. The inquiry closes. The key word is show. I noted the article. I did not call Ethan. I did not call my parents. I went back to my flagged items and spent the rest of the morning doing the work I had been doing for 11 years, which is the work of ensuring that when someone asks to see the records show what they are supposed to show. That evening my father called. He had seen something, a brief mention somewhere. He was not concerned. He was, in fact, slightly energized in the way he gets when he believes he has correctly identified an injustice. Jealous people attack successful men, he said. It's a fact of life. The more visible you are, the more people want to pull you down. I said, which is the sound I make when I do not want to say what I actually think. He said Ethan was handling it perfectly. Poised, calm, not rattled. He said that's real character. When things get hard, you see who people really are. I said, you do, because that sentence was true even if we meant different things by it. I went to my desk after the call and opened the second drawer. The letter was where I had put it. I did not take it out. I just looked at it for a moment, the corner of the envelope visible under the lease. Paperwork always gets the last word. I closed the drawer and went to make dinner. The preliminary inquiry did not close quietly. I know this not because I was following the case specifically, I was not, but because I read the same newsletters every morning, and over the following weeks the mentions grew. A preliminary inquiry became a formal investigation. A formal investigation acquired a second regulatory body. A second regulatory body acquiring jurisdiction over a matter in the financial services sector means the matter has a specific shape, one that experienced people in my field recognize immediately. It means the documents produced in the first round of requests raised more questions than they answered. I want to be careful here because the things I am telling you about my brother's situation are things I understood in stages, the way a picture develops, first an outline, then shapes, then detail. I did not have access to the investigation files. I was not involved. I was a compliance analyst at a different company in a different sector, watching a publicly visible regulatory process unfold in an industry I happen to know well. What I understood from what was publicly visible was this. Someone at Ethan's firm had been approving things they should not have approved. The documentation suggested a pattern, not a single instance, not an isolated error, but a consistent practice over multiple years of authorizing transactions and contracts and invoices without the verification that the authorization was supposed to confirm had actually occurred. In compliance terms, this is called a control failure. The control, the checking mechanism, the verification step, the second pair of eyes, had not been functioning. And whatever had been passing through the gap in that control had been doing so for long enough to accumulate. The question at the center of every regulatory investigation of this type is the same. Who knew, and when did they know it, and what did they do? My father, during this period, was in full defense mode. He called more frequently. He updated me on Ethan's mood, Ethan's confidence, Ethan's legal team, which he described as exceptional, which he said was not cheap but worth it, which he said Ethan had handled by simply writing the check, because that's how you dealt with problems when you had the resources. He did not ask me what I thought about the regulatory developments. I did not offer. I am a compliance analyst. I understand exactly what a conflict of interest looks like, and I understood that if I began to analyze my brother's professional situation for my father's consumption, I would be doing something that was professionally inappropriate, emotionally complicated, and practically useless because my father was not going to hear anything I said about it with the objectivity that the information required. So I listened to his updates and I said, I hope it resolves cleanly, which was true and which contained nothing he could use. What I was thinking while he talked was about paper trails. In the regulated financial services environment, every approval is documented. This is not optional, it is not discretionary, and it is not something that is permitted to occur informally. When an executive approves a contract, there is a document reflecting that approval. When an invoice is authorized for payment above a certain threshold, there is a signed record of that authorization. When a transaction is cleared through a compliance checkpoint, the checkpoint produces a record. These records exist because the rules require them to exist. They are created routinely, without particular attention, in the ordinary flow of a business day. Nobody creating them is thinking about what they will mean years later. They are simply doing what the process requires. And then, when an investigation opens, the records become the investigation. Paperwork always gets the last word. I had been saying that sentence in my head for weeks, and it no longer felt like my supervisor's professional observation. It felt like something closer to a verdict I was watching assemble itself one document at a time. I am going to explain this carefully because it matters that you understand it precisely and not just an outline. Ethan was a senior director overseeing a division that structured financial products, the kind of products whose value depends on the quality of the assets underlying them and the accuracy of the documentation describing those assets. In that role, he sat at an approval junction. Contracts came through him. Vendor agreements came through him. Internal assessments came through him. His signature on a document meant that a senior responsible party had reviewed the underlying materials and determined that the transaction was compliant with applicable regulations and consistent with the company's stated risk parameters. His signature was a control. Over the course of several years, Ethan had been approving documents in that capacity with a frequency and a speed that, in the language of compliance, is described as inconsistent with genuine review. Not impossible, executives under pressure approve documents quickly. But the pattern, across the volume and variety of what was approved and the subsequent evidence of what those documents actually authorized, suggested that the review was not occurring. The signature was being applied to the process, without the process occurring behind it. Fake contracts, inflated invoices, vendor agreements for services that did not appear to have been delivered. Every one of them passed through my brother's approval line. Every one of them carried his signature. Every one of them created a record that was, at the time it was created, simply a normal business document in a normal business flow. And every one of them was still there, in the digital filing systems that companies are legally required to maintain, years later, when investigators asked to see them. I want to be precise about something. I do not know whether my brother understood what he was approving. That is a distinction that matters enormously in a legal context, and it matters to me personally as well, because understanding what your brother did and understanding what your brother intended are two different forms of knowledge, and I have lived with the uncertainty between them. What I know is what the records show. What the records show is that his signature appears on documents that should not have been approved at a frequency and across a period of time that is very difficult to explain as simple oversight. My profession is identifying exactly this type of pattern. Not to assign guilt. That is the job of courts and regulators. But to identify it. To document it. To ensure that when the question is asked, the records are there to answer it. I did not look at Ethan's records. I did not have access to them, and I would not have looked at them if I had. But I understood the shape of what was being described in the public reporting about the investigation with the clarity of someone who has spent 11 years learning to read that particular shape. I sat at my desk one Tuesday morning in the middle of this period with my own quarterly review in front of me. The current status of every compliance process under my oversight, the flagged items, the items in progress, the items resolved. Each line on that report represented something that had been caught, corrected, documented. Each correction represented a future problem that would not materialize. I thought about Ethan's approval processes, about the reviews that had not happened, about the documents that now existed in filing systems, patient and permanent, waiting. I thought about the letter in my desk drawer. A compliance promotion? That's pathetic. I closed my review document and opened a new one and kept working. My mother called me at 8:40 on a Wednesday morning, which was unusual enough that I stepped away from my desk to answer. Her voice had the quality it has when she is trying to be calm in the face of something that is not calm. "Something's happening at Ethan's office," she said. I asked her what she meant. "There are people there. Investigators, I think. Ethan called your father." I asked if Ethan was all right. "I don't know," she said. And then, after a pause, "Do you know what this is?" I was quiet for a moment. "I know what an investigation of this type looks like," I said. "I don't know the specifics." "Is it bad?" I thought about how to answer that honestly, without saying more than I should. "It's serious," I said. "That doesn't mean it ends badly, but it's serious." She was quiet on the other end. "Mom," I said, "make sure Ethan talks to his attorney before he talks to anyone else. Today, not tomorrow." She said she would tell him. I went back to my desk and sat down and was still for a moment in the way you are still when something you have been watching approach finally arrives. The details came out over the following days in the way these things come out, not all at once, not in a clean narrative, but in pieces through phone calls and news articles and the particular fragmented information flow that surrounds a federal investigation when the people involved are trying to process what is happening faster than the information is available. Search warrants had been executed, not just at the office, at multiple locations simultaneously, which is the standard approach in investigations of this scale, designed to prevent the destruction of evidence before it can be secured. Phones had been seized. Computers had been taken. A server room had been accessed by investigators with technical personnel. Several executives had been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation's conclusions. Ethan was among them. The company's accounts, not personal accounts, the company's operating accounts, had been frozen pending a forensic review of the transactions that had flowed through them over a multi-year period. My father did not call me that day. He called the day after. His voice was different from any version of it I had heard in my 35 years. Not broken. My father does not easily break, but stripped. The particular quality of a voice from which the certainty has been removed, and what remains is just the voice. He told me the facts as he understood them. He was not performing. He was not framing. He was just listing what had happened, one item at a time, in the flat voice of a man converting an experience into something he can manage by making it into a list. I listened to all of it. When he finished, I said, "I'm sorry, Dad. I know this is frightening." He was quiet. "Do you know what it means?" he said. "All of it. The accounts, the warrants. Do you know what this is?" "I know what this type of investigation typically involves," I said. "Yes." Another silence. "He signed things," my father said. It came out almost like a question. "The investigation will establish what was signed and what it authorized," I said. "That's what investigations of this type do." My father said, "I always thought he was careful." And I said nothing because there was nothing accurate I could say to that which would also be kind. I learned the details of Ethan's deposition secondhand, through my mother, who had been told by Ethan, who had been told he was permitted to describe the general shape of the proceedings to immediate family. The investigators were not, as my father had initially framed it, attacking a successful man out of jealousy. They were not hostile. They were methodical. They had arrived at the deposition with documents, a significant number of documents, and they had walked through those documents with Ethan, one at a time, and asked him to explain his understanding of each one at the time he had approved it. This is the standard methodology. It is not a trap, exactly. It is simply the systematic application of accountability to a paper trail. Here is the document. Here is your signature. Here is what the document authorized. Here is the evidence of what actually occurred. Please explain the relationship between what you approved and what happened. The challenge Ethan faced in that deposition was the same challenge anyone faces when asked to explain a signature on a document they did not adequately review at the time of signing. The document says what it says, the signature is there, and the passage of time does not clarify the space between them. There were many documents. This is the detail I keep returning to because it is the detail that carries the most weight when I think about how this happened. Not one document, not a handful, many. across years, each one representing a moment when my brother had been handed a document and had placed his signature on it and moved to the next thing. I understand how that happens. In a high-volume environment, under constant pressure, with a calendar full of meetings and a team waiting for decisions, and a culture that rewards speed and momentum, the approval process becomes a flow rather than a review. The document arrives, it comes from a trusted source, someone with the right title sent it. It looks like the last document of this type that was fine, the signature goes on, the process continues. This is how control failures happen. Not through malice, usually through speed. Through the compression of judgment under pressure. Through the gap between what an approval process is designed to mean and what it comes to mean in practice when the volume is high and the time is short and the consequences of slowing down feel more immediate than the theoretical consequences of not examining something carefully enough. Ethan had sat in an approval seat for years. He had been approving things. The things he had been approving had not, in many cases, been what they said they were. And the record showed all of it, patient and permanent, exactly as they had been created. Paperwork always gets the last word. He came on a Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks after the federal investigators had arrived at Ethan's office. He did not call ahead. He rang my doorbell, and when I opened the door, he was standing on the landing in a jacket I had seen him wear for 20 years, and he looked smaller than the last time I had seen him, not physically, but in the way a person looks smaller when the certainty has gone out of them. I brought him inside. I made coffee. He sat at my kitchen table, and I sat across from him, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The apartment was quiet. Through the window, the city made its ordinary Sunday sounds. He told me what the attorney had said. He told me the timeline as he understood it. He told me about Ethan's state of mind, which he described carefully, with a father's protection operating even now. He told me about the legal fees, which were substantial. He told me that the investigators had described, in formal terms, the scope of what they had found in the document review. He looked at his coffee for a moment. Then he looked at me. "Can you explain what's happening?" he said. "All of it. What it means." I thought about how to answer. I thought about the dinner 6 months ago, and the promotion letter, and the specific way he had said the word pathetic with the ease of a man who had never once considered that the thing he was dismissing might be the thing he most needed someone to understand. I thought about 11 years. The scholarships nobody called to discuss. The quiet corrections in the second drawer of my desk. The hours spent reading frameworks that most people would not read voluntarily under any circumstances, and the problems that did not materialize because of them. I looked at my father across the kitchen table, and I felt something I had not entirely expected, which was not satisfaction, and was not vindication, and was not even relief. It was something quieter and more complicated than any of those things. The feeling of being seen, finally, by someone who had not been able to see you before, and understanding that the cost of the seeing had been too high for the feeling to be simple. I said, "I can explain it." Every approval Ethan signed is a record. Every record is a document. Every document is now in front of investigators whose job is to establish what was authorized, by whom, on what basis, and what actually occurred. The number of documents and the period of time over which they exist establishes a pattern. A pattern is harder to explain than a single instance. My father was listening in a way I had not seen him listen before. Not impatiently. Not forming his response while I was still speaking. Just listening. "The investigation will run its course," I said. "The documents will be reviewed. The pattern will be assessed. Legal counsel will do what legal counsel does. And then a determination will be made." My father said, "Can you help? Can you do anything?" And here is where I want to be careful, because this moment matters. I looked at my father, and I understood that what he was asking was not unethical. He was not asking me to interfere, not precisely. He was asking in the desperate, grasping way of a parent who sees his child in danger and reaches instinctively for whoever might have relevant knowledge. But I could not help. Not in any way that would be appropriate, because I was not Ethan's compliance officer. Because the investigation was federal. Because my involvement in a regulatory matter concerning a family member, even informally, even in a private kitchen, would have been a conflict of interest that my profession does not permit. And because the truth was that the paperwork had already gotten the last word. Whatever had happened had happened. It was in the records now, permanent and unalterable. There was nothing to explain that would change what existed. There was nothing to fix that could be fixed by explaining. I looked at my father. "I can explain it," I said. "I just can't fix it." He sat with that for a long time. He drank his coffee. At some point, he reached across the table and put his hand briefly on mine, the way my mother had done in the kitchen after a difficult dinner, years ago. The sideways, careful gesture of a person who loves you and doesn't know how to say the thing they need to say. He didn't say it. I don't know if he will ever say it. Some things arrive too late for the form they should have taken. But he stayed for 2 hours and he asked me questions and I answered the ones I could, and for the first time in my memory, he listened to what I knew about something as though what I knew mattered. There is a final piece of this story that I have not told yet because it is the piece that took me the longest to fully absorb. My promotion, the one my father dismissed across the dinner table on a Friday evening 6 months before federal investigators arrived at my brother's office. That promotion was not an isolated professional event. The specific area of my expanded oversight included the development and refinement of what my company calls compliance signal monitoring. It is a set of processes designed to identify, early, the patterns that precede regulatory problems. Not after the fact, before. The kinds of behaviors and approval irregularities and documentation gaps that do not yet constitute a violation but that, if they continue, will. The work my team had done over the preceding 2 years, the frameworks we had built, the monitoring processes we had refined, the reporting structures we had strengthened, had been observed in our industry. Not loudly. Not in a way that generates headlines or generates the kind of recognition my father finds legible, but observed. 3 months after the investigation into Ethan's firm opened, my supervisor called me into a meeting that included 2 senior partners I had not previously interacted with directly. They told me that our compliance monitoring approach had been referenced in a federal guidance document issued in connection with a broader regulatory initiative examining similar control failures at multiple firms in the sector. Not Ethan's firm specifically. The broader pattern. My department's work had helped define what regulators were looking for. I am not telling you this because I want you to understand that I was important. I am not certain that importance is the right frame. I am telling you because of the specific irony of the timing. While my father was dismissing my promotion at a dinner table and praising my brother's trajectory, the professional path he considered pathetic was quietly becoming more consequential than either of us had known, and the professional path he considered real success was quietly accumulating the documentation that would eventually require that success to be examined very carefully. The 2 things were not connected causally. My work did not expose my brother. The investigation had its own origins, its own trajectory, its own internal logic. I did not cause any of it, and I did not want to. But there is something in the parallel that I have thought about often in the time since. The things that look like real success from the outside, the title, the compensation, the watch, the vacation, the restaurant reservation 6 weeks in advance, those things are visible because they are designed to be visible. They are built to be seen. And the things that look like paperwork, like compliance frameworks, like quiet procedural work in a department most people cannot fully explain, those things are visible only when they fail, or when they succeed at exactly the right moment. My father understood success as something you could see. I had spent 11 years building something you could only see when it was needed. I took the promotion letter out of my desk drawer the night after my father's visit. Not to look at it again, exactly. I had read it enough times. I took it out because I had spent months putting it away, closing the drawer on it, and I wanted to stop doing that. I wanted to set it somewhere I could see it without it being a statement. I put it on the bookshelf. Between 2 books I had read in the last year, practical and unremarkable, exactly where it belonged. My brother's legal situation is ongoing as I tell you this. I will not speculate on outcomes. I do not know what the final determination will be, and it would not be appropriate for me to guess. What I know is that he is dealing with consequences that were built over years, one signature at a time, in the ordinary flow of a professional life that moved too quickly to examine what it was authorizing. I call my mother on Sundays. My father calls me occasionally now, with a different quality in his voice than he had before. Not apologetic, not transformed, but different. Quieter. He asks about my work sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. And when he asks, he listens to the answer in the way I have always wanted him to listen, with the attention of a person who has come to understand that what they didn't know was costing them something. It is not everything I might have wanted, but it is real, and it is more than I had before, and I have learned to accept real things in the forms they arrive rather than waiting for the forms I had imagined. My supervisor told me once, early in my career, that compliance work is the professional equivalent of being the person who checks that the parachute is packed correctly. Nobody thinks about you when the jump goes fine. They are thinking about the view, the rush, the altitude. The packed parachute is an invisible given. You become visible only when something goes wrong. I spent 11 years being invisible in that particular way, building the framework, catching the small thing, correcting the process, documenting the correction. Closing the drawer. My father once stood at a dinner table and told me that what I had built was pathetic. Years later, he sat in my kitchen and asked me to help him understand the consequences of what paperwork can do when it has been accumulating unchecked for long enough. I explained it to him. I explained it carefully and precisely, the way I explain everything, with the patience of someone who has spent a long time learning to be clear about complicated things. And then I told him I couldn't fix it, because I couldn't. The records were what they were. The signatures were where they were. The paper trail was assembled, permanent, waiting exactly where it had always been. Paperwork always gets the last word. My father once stood at that table and said, "That's not real success." I believed him for longer than I should have. Standing outside a federal courthouse on a Tuesday afternoon, watching my father try to understand what was happening to the son he had always believed could not be touched by ordinary consequences, I understood something I want to carry with me for the rest of my working life. The people who understand the rules rarely look impressive from the outside. They work in quiet offices. They read frameworks nobody else wants to read. They catch the thing before it becomes the disaster. They sign their name to documents that mean the process occurred, the review happened, the control is functioning, and they mean it every time because they understand what the signature is for. They do not drive the flashiest car. They do not wear the watch people recognize across the table. They are not the ones being praised at Friday dinners. But they are, almost without exception, still standing when everyone else isn't. The letter is on my bookshelf. It has been there since the night my father came to see me. I walk past it every morning on my way to make coffee, and I do not stop to look at it, and I do not put it away. It is simply there, doing what documents do, existing, patient, permanent, exactly what it was always worth.